there, curious minds! Welcome back to the School of Everything. In this video, we will dive deep into the fascinating world of psychology and human behavior, where we will talk about something that happens to every single one of us, often without us even realizing it: reactance and the forbidden fruit effect. Buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride. Have you ever been told not to do something, and suddenly that's all you want to do? It's like when someone says, "Don't press this button," and it becomes the only thing you can think about. I know, right? We've all been there. Today, we're going to explore why that happens and what it means for us. First up, reactance. This fancy term describes what happens when people feel their freedom to choose is being restricted. It's like your brain turns into a rebellious teenager and says, "Oh yeah? Watch me." This often results in us doing the exact opposite of what we're told. For example, think about a teenager who's told they can't go to a party. Suddenly, that party is the most important event of the century. Or consider a customer who's told an item is out of stock. Now, that's the one thing they absolutely must have. The concept of reactance was first introduced by psychologist Jack Brehm in 1966. Brehm's theory suggests that when people perceive a threat to their freedom of choice, they experience psychological reactance, which motivates them to restore their freedom. And get this, there's a ton of science backing this up. Let's dive into one of these classic studies. This one dives into how we react to restrictions and barriers, something we all encounter in everyday life. This is a fascinating study conducted by Brehm and Weintraub back in 1977. Picture this: toddlers and toys. A classic combination, right? Brehm and Weintraub set up an experiment involving a group of toddlers and some very appealing toys. They placed a highly desirable toy behind a transparent barrier. Some barriers were low, easy for the toddlers to reach over, while others were high, making it much more difficult to get the toy. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The researchers observed how these toddlers responded to the barriers. What do you think happened? When the barrier was low and easy to overcome, the toddlers showed moderate interest in the toy. But when the barrier was high and challenging, their desire for the toy skyrocketed. They were much more determined to get their hands on it. This experiment highlights a key psychological principle: reactance. When we perceive our freedom to access something as being restricted, we often want it even more. It's like a built-in resistance to being told we can't have something. Think about it in everyday life. Ever noticed how limited time offers or members-only deals seem so much more enticing? That's reactance in action. Brehm and Weintraub's study shows just how powerful this reaction can be, even in toddlers. Now, let's switch gears to the forbidden fruit effect, which is like reactance's cousin. This idea comes from the saying, "Forbidden fruit tastes the sweetest." It means that when something is off limits, it becomes more attractive simply because it's forbidden. Remember the story of Adam and Eve? The forbidden apple was just too tempting. Fast forward to today, and you see it everywhere. Think about limited edition sneakers, or that exclusive VIP concert ticket. When something's off limits or scarce, it instantly becomes more desirable. In the fashion industry, when a brand releases a limited edition product, it becomes highly sought after. People queue for hours, and items sell out in minutes. Why? Because the restriction on availability makes it irresistible. Back in 1975, 3 brilliant researchers named Werschel, Lee, and Adewole conducted a fascinating study. They wanted to explore how scarcity affects our perception of value. Here's what they did. They gathered a group of participants and presented them with 2 jars of cookies. One jar was packed with 10 cookies, a nice, abundant supply. The other jar, though, only had 2 lonely cookies. Now, you'd think a cookie is a cookie, right? Well, think again. Participants were asked to rate the cookies on attractiveness, desirability, and overall value. Surprisingly, the cookies in the almost empty jar, the scarce ones, were rated much higher in every category. These cookies were seen as more attractive and desirable, even though they were exactly the same as the cookies in the full jar. So, what's the takeaway here? Scarcity makes things more appealing. When something is in limited supply, we tend to value it more. It's a principle that marketers and advertisers have been using for years. Think about those limited edition products, or only a few left in stock messages you see online. Now, let's talk about a fun experiment. It's called the "Do Not Press This Button" test, and it's as intriguing as it sounds. Imagine this. You're in a room with a big, shiny red button right in front of you. Next to it, there's a bold sign that reads, "Do not press." Sounds simple enough, right? Just don't press the button. But here's the catch. Almost inevitably, most people end up pressing it. Why does this happen? Let's dive into the psychology behind it. Our brains are wired to resist restrictions on our autonomy. When we're told we can't do something, it often makes us want to do it even more. This phenomenon is known as psychological reactance. It's like a built-in defense mechanism that kicks in when we feel our freedom is being limited. Think about it. When you're told, "Don't press this button," your mind starts racing. What could happen if I press it? Why shouldn't I press it? The very act of being told not to do something sparks curiosity and a rebellious streak in many of us. It's a classic case of wanting what we can't have. This "do not press this button" test is a perfect example of how restrictions can make an action or an object more tempting. It's the same reason why forbidden fruit often seems the sweetest, or why limited edition items and exclusive offers are so alluring. When something is off limits, our desire for it often increases. This simple test shows how powerful our desire for freedom and autonomy is. When told not to do something, it sparks our curiosity and rebellious streak, making us want to do it even more. Now, let's see this fun experiment in practice. This is straight from a TV program in Brazil. It's the perfect demonstration of the "do not press this button" test. Are you ready? Let's dive in. Picture this, a busy square in the heart of Brazil. Right in the middle of the square, there's a big, shiny button with a sign that reads, "Do not press." Sounds simple, right? Just walk on by and don't press the button. But as we know, that's not how our minds work. Passing buyers see this tempting button and almost immediately feel the urge to press it. It's a classic example of psychological reactance. When we're told we can't do something, we often want to do it even more. The curiosity is just too strong to resist. So what happens next? Well, this is where it gets really fun. The moment someone gives in to the temptation and presses the button, something amazing happens. They become an immediate celebrity. Isn't that fantastic? This experiment perfectly captures the essence of psychological reactance and how a simple restriction can make something incredibly tempting. It's not just a fun prank, it's a peek into the workings of the human mind. So, how do reactance and the forbidden fruit effect play out in relationships? Think about it. The more someone tells you not to date a particular person, the more intriguing and appealing they might become. This can lead to rebellious dating choices, often termed as Romeo and Juliet syndrome. The more forbidden the relationship, the more intense it can feel. Psychologists have found that parental disapproval of romantic partners can intensify feelings of love and attachment. A study by Driscoll, Davis, and Lipetz, 1972, found that couples experiencing parental opposition felt stronger feelings of love than those without such opposition. This phenomenon can be explained by the reactance theory. When our freedom to love is restricted, we fight harder for that freedom. In the marketing world, companies often leverage these psychological principles to drive sales. For example, Black Friday sales create a sense of scarcity and urgency. Consumers feel their freedom to purchase is limited by time and stock, leading to a rush of buying behavior. In another study by Cialdini et al., 1973, it was found that when people were informed that a product was in limited supply, they were more likely to make a purchase. This is because the restriction on availability triggered a reactance response, making them want the product even more. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with some quick tips on handling reactance, that urge we all feel to resist restrictions. Here are a few ways to manage it and make more mindful choices. Acknowledge your feelings. The first step is to recognize when you're experiencing reactance. When you feel that strong urge to do something just because it's forbidden, take a moment to acknowledge it. Understand the source. Ask yourself why you feel restricted. Is the rule or limitation reasonable? Understanding the reason behind the restriction can help reduce the intensity of your reaction. Consider the consequences. Think about what might happen if you give in to the urge. Sometimes a little foresight can help you decide if it's worth it or if you're better off resisting. Find alternatives. Look for other ways to satisfy your need for autonomy. If you can't do one thing, is there another way you can feel a sense of control or freedom? Stay calm. Reactance can sometimes make us act impulsively. Take a deep breath and give yourself a moment to think things through before making a decision. Communicate. If someone else's rule or restriction is causing your reactance, try talking to them about it. Open communication can often help resolve feelings of frustration and make the situation more manageable. Practice mindfulness. Techniques like meditation and mindfulness can help you stay grounded and focused, making it easier to handle feelings of reactance calmly. By using these tips, you can better manage your reactions to restrictions and make more thoughtful decisions. Remember, understanding why we feel the way we do is the first step to gaining control over our actions. That's all for today, folks. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss out on any of our future deep dives into the mind. And remember, next time someone says, "Don't do this," ask yourself why it suddenly seems so irresistible. And hey, maybe press that button. Or not. But if you do, just make sure there's no confetti cannon waiting to surprise you. Your choice.